Hey everybody, it's Sean Bewley the Kid. Now I'm going to tell you guys a story that took place in territorial New Mexico in the 1880s. And when I first read this story as a teenager in Silver City, New Mexico, the ending was shocking. I was so shocked I reread the story many times. And it had an impact on my life and made me almost not trust certain types of people. Now, before we get going, if you guys like stories like this, if you like stories of lost Spanish gold mines, the Old West, outlaws, some of the expeditions I've been on, please subscribe and take a moment to hit the like button because this helps the channel. It helps the YouTube algorithm present this story to other people who might want to see it. And don't trust the YouTube algorithm to show you my videos. Go to my channel and sift around. Look at the videos because YouTube would rather show you dancing bears, singing pilgrims, and how to make money on YouTube. That's the kind of stuff YouTube wants to show you. But if you like this stuff, go to my channel. There's a lot more to me than you know. Now let's get started. As a teenager, I was a high school student, Silver High School, and I mean this is an example of just I kept reading books after books. Now I did read some fiction books, mostly Louis L'Amour. I read every single book that Louis L'Amour wrote on the Old West. But I was also really interested in the true tales of the Southwest. And what ended up happening was we had this book in the 1980s. This is Ranchers, Ramblers, and Renegades by Mark Simmons. And Mark was an interesting guy because he was actually a columnist for the Santa Fe newspaper and the El Paso Times and the New Mexico Gazette. And one of his jobs as a columnist for those places was to tell stories that people may not have known. So he did a lot of research. And I have read so many books and I've never seen this story in any other book, but apparently he came across this obscure article in the Chicago Tribune. And it is really, really creepy. So anyway, before we begin, I'm just going to tell you this story took place in territorial New Mexico. There wasn't a lot of people there at the time. Now, just prior to this story was the Lincoln County Wars, and that's the famous one that it was the Murphy Dolan gang, and all them were fighting. And Billy the Kid and his pals, his regulators, got involved. And it got real bloody over there to where it drew national attention all the way to Washington, D.C. And Territorial Governor Lew Wallace, he put a bounty on Billy the Kid's head. And then supposedly, now I have a tendency to be on the fence about whether Billy the Kid was actually killed by Pat Garrett. I think it's highly likely he was, but it's possible he wasn't. And as far as Brushy Bill Roberts is concerned, that he came forward and said he was Billy the Kid, I highly doubt he was. But, I'm open-minded. Now, Billy the Kid was supposedly shot and killed on July 14th, 1881. And this story I'm about to tell you occurred right around the time Billy the Kid was shot by Pat Garrett. Now, this valley that I'm talking about is the Rio Grande Valley, and it comes all the way from up northern New Mexico, Colorado. It goes all the way down and flows right through the middle of New Mexico, all the way down to El Paso, Texas, and then on into Mexico. And the story takes place right in the area between Las Cruces and Socorro, New Mexico. Now, I have quite a bit of history in that area myself, because not only did we go over to Elephant Butte Lake over in Truth or Consequences and water skied and things like that there, but when I was in Silver High School, I was a 4.0 student and wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to do, but I did apply to 2 colleges. And I applied to New Mexico Tech in Socorro for geology, and I got accepted. And I applied to New Mexico State in Las Cruces for electrical engineering. So here I am, geology. I love rocks. I really love rocks. And electrical engineering, I really loved electronics. So long story short on that, I went to neither. I joined the Army. Where was the logic in that? And by the way, you get to the Army and you're digging a foxhole and you're telling the sergeant, I watched the ads and it says be all you can be. And the sergeant looks at me and he says, "Private, this is all you can be." So here's how this story begins. It is actually 10 years later. It's 1891. And there is a reporter for the Chicago Tribune. He hears that this really prominent jeweler from Boston named Campbell Hardy happened to be in Chicago. And at the time, people out east weren't getting a whole lot of accurate information about the Southwest. Most of their information came from obscure newspaper articles or those dime novels. That's how a lot of these Old West gunfighters and so forth got their fame, was from these dime novels. And so there was a hunger, there was an interest for stories about what is it really like in Arizona and New Mexico, in the Old West there. And they didn't call it the Old West, it was the current time. So this reporter, he was talking to this jeweler named Campbell Hardy, because he had heard in Campbell Hardy's younger days, he was peddling his jewelry out west. And so he sat down with him and he said, tell me one of your most memorable things about being down there and traveling through Indian country and all that. And so Campbell Hardy told him the following story. Now, he was traveling, which is really insane, but he was traveling with about $800 worth of jewelry and about $1,600 of cash. He had been selling his jewelry across the West, and sometimes, they called them peddlers, but they were traveling salesmen. They had their stuff and they would travel from town to town and show people their things and make money that way. And that's how some of the young people made their start. Now, he talks about traveling on a old trail that stretched up and down the Rio Grande River. And he was somewhere between Las Cruces and Socorro. And back then, you had to follow the rivers, especially if you were riding a horse or you had mules and stuff like that, because water in New Mexico is life. If you veer off of the water too much, you will die. So he's traveling along the Rio Grande River, which is actually a very well-traveled trail. It has been traveled even long before the conquistadors, but when the conquistadors came, they traveled up it, and then they ended up making Santa Fe, New Mexico, a capital. So this was a very important route. But the interesting thing about this stretch is there's hardly anything there. It's just a bunch of desert and sagebrush. If you guys have traveled through that area, Interstate 25 runs right down along there. And so he's traveling along, and there's not a lot of stuff along the way. But he gets tired. He's pretty hungry. He's kind of out of food. And he comes upon like an old shack. I don't know if it was really old. He just called it kind of ramshackled shack. And there were some people living there. And he stopped by and he asked if they had something for him to eat. And so they offered him coffee and some bread. And so he kind of got an uneasy feeling when he met these people. Now, there was a man in his 60s. He was the oldest one there, and he went by the name Moody. And he had a wife, and then there were two younger guys, and Campbell Hardy thought those must be his sons. And there was a couple other women too, and he figured those were the wives. Well, he was sitting there eating, drinking coffee, and they were really inquiring. You know, they'd like to see his jewelry, so he was showing them different pieces of jewelry. They said they were interested in buying. He still had a really uneasy feeling about this family. And then the old man, Moody, just kept asking him probing questions that made him even more uneasy. Moody was asking, "Have you seen anyone else on the trail?" And he was basically asking other questions that Campbell Hardy just thought, he's almost asking me questions if somebody will miss me if I'm gone. And so his sense of alarm was heightened tremendously. He's sitting in this house, and he decided he probably should go soon, but out of the corner of his eye, he saw one of the sons heading to the barn with a shotgun. And he thought, he needs to get the heck out of there. He really needs to leave. And the woman, she said, "Can you come out to the barn? I've got some purebred horses I'd like to show you, and you might be able to trade some jewelry for one." They're trying to get him in the barn. So Campbell Hardy's like, "No thanks," and he kind of got out of the house and he went to the wood line as quickly as possible. And when he looked back at the house, they were cussing away. They were really upset. So what Campbell Hardy did was he thought, my life is in danger really bad. So instead of going the way that he said he was heading, he doubled back and he went the opposite way, hoping to throw them off. Now, once he got down the trail, about a half a mile, he ran into two trappers. And he let them know what just happened. Now, the trappers were local to that area, and they kind of suspected something was amiss at that house. In fact, one of the trappers said that they thought they were somehow murderers. The trappers offered to go back with Campbell Hardy to confront them because they were seasoned men. And Campbell Hardy didn't want anything to do with that place, so he said no. So what he did instead was he offered the trappers, since they were armed with rifles, he offered them some jewelry that was worth money if they would just accompany him down the trail. So they went down the trail, all three of them together, for a little ways. And then a gunshot rang out and a bullet narrowly missed Campbell Hardy's head. Now the trappers, they got off their horses in a hurry and they started taking cover and had their rifles out. And then after that, a gunfight ensued. And when things got quiet, the trappers called out for Hardy. So Campbell Hardy went over, and the trappers were standing there. And Moody and one of his sons was laying dead there in the brush. So after the gunfight was over, Campbell Hardy and the two trappers, they headed back up to the cabin, and they found the cabin was empty. And so they went out into the barn. And when they got out to the barn, there were two women digging a grave for Campbell Hardy. So a couple lawmen were summoned, and they came up to the cabin, and they started poking around the barn. And it wasn't long before they unearthed 20 human skeletons. This family, headed by this man named Moody, had been killing travelers for years and burying them in their barn and around their barn. The women were promptly hung in trees along the trail, along with the bodies of Moody and his sons. This would serve as a warning to anyone who would commit such gross atrocities in the New Mexico territory. Now, as a teenager, when I read this, it really gave me the chills, and it made me think that not everybody who invites you in their home has good intentions. So when I went into situations like that in the future, I always kind of looked out the window. I always kept thinking someone heading to the barn with a rifle. So anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed this story. It's one I have not forgotten. One of the most memorable Southwest stories that I had ever read. And if you like this, go ahead and hit the like button. Please subscribe. Please go to my channel. Check out some of my other videos. I've got some other really amazing stories, some of which I was part of. And I appreciate you guys watching. And we'll catch you later.
Bewley the Kid.